Well, man, you can't really do a metabolic reset very well when you're on the road for 10 days.
Oh, yeah, that sounds hard. How did it go
You
for
know,
you?
it was so well, it actually wasn't hard at Dave Asprey's conference because all the meals were grass-fed beef and vegetables. And I mean, that was it.
Yeah.
So I didn't have a problem there at all. Um, it was just kind of exhausting days because the first 2 days were 13-hour days. The second day was, till noon, and then, catching a flight and, blah, blah, blah. So,
Yeah.
and the ALS conference also had, for being held at a hotel in Las Vegas, of course you're not getting grass fed anything, but, they really worked hard to have, um, nutrient dense, nice vegetable options. And they had beef, they had a lamb stew one day that was really good. So, they had some pretty good options. And then, it was kind of a madhouse coming back yesterday. So I basically just had eggs for breakfast at an airport restaurant and didn't eat again
Mhm.
for the rest of the day. So, I certainly I I would say my eating windows, I did have pretty tight eating windows for the most part.
Mhm.
So I did maintain that, but I certainly wasn't, rigidly following the reset as I did the first time.
And
Yeah.
how yeah, I mean, I think that was one of the lessons I learned during it the first time was, having making adjustments along the way and listening to your body and not being so rigid. So, that's something I'll carry into future, food challenges and efforts as well.
Well, so the ALS conference was interesting though. They talked a lot. Um, Diet was a huge part of it. They had a number of nutritionists speaking, and they have also had some pretty good benefits with the ketogenic diet in
Mhm.
some of the work they're doing. But they did say, it's very specific to the person. But one of the things they talked about was neuroinflammation and inflammation and dairy.
Mhm.
And, of course, the yogurt, you know, it's dairy.
Yeah.
And, I still wonder. I know we've talked a little bit about, I think I talked to you, I know I had talked to Geraldo about how the dairy industry cleans, and they clean with quaternary ammonium compounds, which actually cling to the vats. And,
Mm.
it's always there, and that is damaging to the cell membrane. So I wonder if that isn't part of the issue too. And, so I I didn't have, I'll say I almost didn't have any dairy at all for the 10 days. I was able to, the last couple of days, the friends I stayed with at an Airbnb in Vegas actually had half and half. And so I had some coffee with half and half. But, Dave Asprey with his coffee, no, there was no dairy available.
Mhm.
And so kind of I was trying to think if there was I don't think there was any dairy at the ALS conference either.
Mm. Okay. And that's because of the proteins in dairy? Is that what the concern is, or the lactose, or all?
I think they just said they're inflammatory.
Mhm. Mhm.
I mean, I don't know if it's the casein or, you know, and oh, I know one of the other issues was with the mucin production. So the more dairy you eat, the more like phlegmy kind of, when you drink milk or eat yogurt, you can often get more mucus production.
Mm,
I don't know if you noticed that, but
mm-mm,
um,
mm-mm.
so anyway, that was kind of interesting for me.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I, and so now that you're back, what did you change? What did you do?
well, I mean, I just got back last night, so today,
Okay.
like, you know, I my brother wanted a cheeseburger after his colonoscopy, so I took him to get a cheeseburger. I had a cheeseburger, but not with any, I didn't put any cheese on it.
Yeah.
So it was dairy free. Um, but that's all I've had to eat today.
Yeah. Nice.
But just, just the stress level of that sort of pace,
Hmm.
of, going from conference to conference and the long days and that just, it puts a lot of stress on your body. And like, people don't often think about like all little stressors like that. But,
Hmm.
and of course, now we're moving into November, which is the super stress month.
Hmm.
As you
Yeah.
move into Thanksgiving, going into Christmas, all the kind of hustle and bustle of everything you've got to get done in the last 2 months of the year.
Yeah. Yep. I already feel it. I'm already looking at the weekends that are booked. I mean, there's a lot and it hasn't really started. Although today, Halloween is the official beginning of, I call it the eating season for people, for my
Yeah,
clients.
I mean, it really is. It really is the eating season. And I was having a conversation with somebody about Halloween candy and um, how much candy gets pumped out. But I think a lot of parents now let the kids go out for Halloween and then they come home and kind of sort through the candy and throw a lot of it away
Yeah.
and, sort of dole a little bit out at a time. So that's sort of interesting. But um, so I wanted to talk to you about the stress score, because
Mm,
the other thing, so when we were at Dave Asprey's conference, there was a company there that is um, I don't know exactly what their platform is, but they pull in data from all these different things. And we were talking to them about the little antibiotic antidote study we're going to run, because Charlie had noticed it had an impact on his heart rate variability. And then we were talking about perfect peace, and that had an impact on his stress score. Well, all these different companies have different algorithms of how they score stress. And so he asks specifically, do you know how Whoop scores stress and what the subcategories are? And can you dig down into that data and look to see? And I guess their software can maybe do that. So we're going to do some follow up with him. But, then we had the discussion about your Oura ring. And so I wanted you to just kind of summarize that again about what happened on the 30-day reset, and then your discussion with Dr. Mike, and whether that's really a good thing. Because one of the things at the ALS conference they were talking about is, as you move into starvation mode, your body slows its metabolic rate. And
mhm.
so this fasting can actually slow your metabolic rate, and too much fasting um, does that. So they were talking very much in people with ALS. I mean, and obviously people who are doing this 30-day reset are not people who have ALS, but they do use intermittent fasting some, but it's more of an issue where people are not getting nutrient uptake. So even though they're eating, their
Mm,
body thinks they're fasting because they're not they're not getting nutrients.
okay. Yeah. Yeah. Well, what I noticed was as the eating window got tighter and tighter, um, my energy lowered. And that makes sense, right? Just from an energy balance standpoint. Um, overall, and I consider myself as having a pretty high nutrient dense diet. So I don't know if we're talking calories or nutrients, but it seemed like all of them were being reduced. And I was tired, and I know that there are studies about this where your activities automatically can mirror the energy that you take in. So in people who overeat, if they eat more than they typically would, they fidget or they move around a little bit more, because the body wants to burn that fuel.
Right.
I think that's just a natural, our body's part of our body's wisdom. But the reverse is also true, that when you start restricting energy, you are more tired and a little more lethargic. Small things feel like bigger efforts. And that's definitely how I felt the more we got into the fasting. And at the same time that I was feeling this sort of lowered energy, my Oura Ring data was looking amazing. My HRV was going up. I was, just in this great parasympathetic state. What else? My respiratory rate lowered, which is good. And I actually, that's something I need to work on. I do try to do breathing techniques that lower my respiratory rate. I'm trying to think what else changed, but the HRV was the big one. And so I thought, well, wow, I've got this big disconnect between how I feel and my HRV data. And I've been tracking HRV for since 2015. So I'm used to how the data correlates to how I feel. And this did not square for me.
Yeah.
And actually, because my HRV was higher than I'd ever seen it, I'm like, oh, well, I should, do my 2K row test or do some benchmark, performance test. I should be able to rock that. And talking to myself through okay, I'll warm up better. I'll give myself a long warm up, and maybe I'll just start to feel great to match my HRV. And it just didn't work out very well. And so I talked to Dr. Mike T. Nelson, and he actually studies HRV, and he's very familiar with all the different devices. And he said that Aura, actually, their algorithms favor the parasympathetic state, but it's deceptive when you're fasting, because what it's really showing you is that you're in this lowered metabolic state, kind of like what you said initially.
Yeah.
And yeah, so the data was accurate in a way, but biased, skewed towards giving this glowing report about HRV. And so, and it all kind of went back to normal once I started eating in a normal time restricted way. Normal for me meaning 13 to 14 hours of a fast.
Well, so one of the things I was thinking is, I'm wondering how all of those metrics work when you go into hibernation. And I know humans don't hibernate, but I've looked quite a bit at hibernation.
Yeah.
And to me, some of those metrics seem like a movement toward a hibernation state.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, where you would be in a very, calm, as you're sort of slowing your metabolism to go into this deep sleep.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of the idea behind taking a fasting time in many cultures, to go deeper into meditation or prayer, or into, religious practices. Fasting's part of it, and it helps, I think, maybe take you into it, your mind into a different place than the typical, more is better, more energy, more strength training, whatever your thing is. I want to get better at it. I want to lift more weight. That's my normal state. And fasting perhaps is the time to step back from all that and take things down a few notches and go into that, not necessarily hibernation, but inside.
The
Yeah.
inner space. Yeah.
Mhm.
Which that does make sense. And I would like to ask, I'll go back and ask some of the doctors uh about, and again, this isn't about ALS, but like all of these things are connected, because they actually have people like put an Oura ring on or some type of ring to measure some of these things periodically. They don't like them to wear them all the time because of the sensors and the sensitivity of them. But I would be interested to hear what they have to say. The other kind of big part of discussion over this last week or so was detoxification and what happens when you go into a fat burning state, if you have toxins in your tissues, in your fat tissues, and you're releasing those, how that can sort of bring you down. But to me, that would be different than what you're seeing on the Oura ring.
Yeah. So you're saying circulating toxins, if they're not bound out somehow, or maybe people need
Yeah.
extra support with that.
Yes. So I think you had mentioned when you were doing the 30-day reset, you had always been very regular. And when you did the reset, it
Yeah.
kind of stopped you up. Well, so if the bowels aren't moving
Yeah.
and you're burning fat, a lot of the toxic burdens that we're exposed to today actually get taken up in our fat as a means of protecting us. So they're
Mm.
sequestered in our fat. As we start to burn fat,
It's
it's
mobilized.
released. It's
Yeah.
released into the stool, into the in the urine. But if you don't have good bile flow to excrete that,
Hmm.
that's also an issue. So I know in here he does talk about some of the, like if people have had a gallbladder removal, or if they don't have good bile flow, taking things like Tudka, or
Hmm.
how to get good bile flow. But that was one of the things they talked about at this conference. And there was someplace else I think it might have been Dr. Magarinos when he talked to us, but I've talked to several people who are like, don't do any major detoxification until you're having at least one bowel movement a day, but
Hmm.
preferably you want to be having 2 to 3 bowel movements a day, if you're going to do any type of detoxification. And they talked about that at this meeting with sauna.
Yeah.
So, for people who are using sauna, if you're using the far infrared sauna, which is what they were recommending, to actually not be in a sauna where you're sitting inside a box where you're breathing in what you're excreting, that,
Mhm.
actually the saunas that you sit with your head outside is
Oh.
actually better. So that was kind of interesting. Too, but they were saying even when you start to get in sauna and you're releasing that, you need to be moving your bowels.
Hmm. Makes sense. I think constipation is a terrible, it's not just uncomfortable, it has much farther reaching consequences.
So what exactly did Dr. Mike say about the way the Oura ring is measuring stress then, that if you're not feeling good, but it's telling you should feel good because you're in this lower stress state?
Um, yeah, that's why I wanted to get him involved in the conversation so he could go into greater depth about that. Um,
Okay, well, we'll have to get some answers from him, because I think that's That's interesting. And then, the other interesting sort of challenge is these continuous glucose monitors, which you know a lot more about than I do. I mean, I do the Keto Mojo.
Mhm.
And then I have one of those. I don't know whether, it's just kind of the standard one that you get at the drugstore that, and
Okay.
I haven't been doing it for a while because I don't have any strips with it. But when I was doing them side by side, most of the time they were pretty close to each other, but on occasion, there might be 10 or 15 points different.
Okay. Yeah. Um, and even, gosh, I had that problem with different test strips, pulling them from different boxes with my Keto Mojo.
Mm-hmm.
So, these things aren't perfect, but over time, I guess if you're just looking at your morning fasted, you'll get enough.
You get a sense of whether you're way off the charts or you're
Yeah.
in a decent range.
Yeah. The CGMs, though, I do work with a lot of clients who wear them, and I'm seeing that they're frustrated. Like if the company, one of the popular companies right now, has switched from the Dexcom 7 to a Stello device, and
Mhm.
they're getting completely different readings, like off by 20, 30 points, which kind of matters.
Yeah.
Um,
So what's the difference between how those two are measured?
they're made by, uh, I think they're made by the same company, so I don't know what the actual differences are.
They're measuring something called glucose oxidase. I went down a rabbit hole on that a while back. Let me see if I can find my.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's not direct blood glucose because it's interstitial fluid, right? So it's measuring.
Well, I have so many discussions that involve glucose oxidase that I probably can't. But okay, so but it's bringing up something else for me because there was a gentleman at the company, at the conference who had something called Live O2.
Mhm.
And it's basically a device for creating intermittent hypoxia.
Okay.
So you set it up and you put a mask on and you're exercising on a bike or a treadmill or something. And you start out, so you basically do these challenges where you simulate going to altitude and having significantly reduced oxygen and back, which also to me mirrors some of the Wim Hof breathing techniques. If you've done those where you do the breath holding,
Mm. Okay.
um, he will have you. So his breathing technique, you hyperventilate, so you super oxygenate,
Mhm.
and then you breath hold, which depletes your oxygen. And this device was basically a machine that's producing super saturated oxygen. And you've got a pulse ox, and they're looking at it, and your oxygen saturation is, you know, 99 is about as high as it measures. It never goes to 100 on the thing. So it goes to 99, and then they restrict the oxygen while you're exercising, and it drops down to like 92, and then they switch it back up, and you're doing this, and you do the challenge multiple times, and then you stop and you're just doing a resting, and you see how long it takes for your oxygen saturation to go back up. But essentially what he was describing is where you have inflammation in the body, when you go through this intermittent hypoxia, it when you start to restore oxygen to the system,
Mhm.
if it takes you longer to go back up to the full saturation, it's an indication of inflammation in different areas of the body, and the oxygen is going to those areas of inflammation first.
Okay. How did they map that?
He didn't have a mapping approach, but what they've shown is in people with dementia who do this intermittent hypoxia work, that they actually start improving. And there's a new paper, I think I haven't had a chance to read it, but I think it came out last week in Parkinson's, showing that intermittent hypoxia can improve symptoms.
That's fascinating. I love this world of breath work and hypoxia and hyperoxia. I in the past have played around with that with ozone, oxygen, but it makes sense. And then in the context of dementia, I know that like hyperbarics at the low pressure, very impactful. So again, just bringing oxygen to the brain.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot we don't know, but this, back to the the glucometer, glucose oxidase it's an enzyme that, let me see what I can. And I think it's also used in food preservation.
Oh, wow.
So if you think about that, so it catalyzes the oxidation of glucose to hydrogen peroxide and D-glucono, I think gamma. No, that's not gamma. Whatever that Greek letter is, lactone. But that's interesting. The enzyme is produced by certain species of fungi and insects and displays antibacterial activity when oxygen and glucose are present. So I'm wondering how those CGM, let me look at that, because I know that's what I looked at. Okay. I mean, that's how it's working, but I don't really, that doesn't make sense to me if the enzyme comes from fungi and insects. So we must also be making that reaction somehow. I mean, do you know how it works? Because one of the questions I had was, so sorry, I'm jumping all over the place. But this book I've been reading, which actually my computer is sitting on, or rereading, The Extracellular Matrix.
Oh, I've heard you talk about that.
And ground regulations. I mean, the extracellular matrix is essentially the glycocalyx, but this is kind of crazy. I'm going to find this back here. It goes into all these details, but this research that they did on puncturing. So, the puncture phenomenon. So this researcher who did all this work on the extracellular matrix and ground regulation, so, electrical activity and grounding, it says it was always important for Pissinger, he's the author of the book and the scientist who did all this research, to point out that even minor injuries, such as the prick of a needle, whether for drawing blood, acupuncture, or for neural therapy, lead to a clear reaction in the extracellular matrix. Usually in the hours after blood has been drawn, there are large changes in iodine consumption values. As Pissinger previously stated, the loss of 3 to 5 milliliters of blood cannot be responsible for this effect. Only the puncture itself can be responsible. The puncture that affects the perivascular tissue, which, as is well known, is a loose connective tissue richly supplied with autonomic nerves. This is why I have mentioned a puncture phenomenon or a puncture effect. This puncture makes a wound, if only a small one. Besides this, there is even a change in potential from the needle to the tissue, as will be discussed, which is in the range that can be measured. The puncture effect also manifests in other characteristics of autonomic function and is an essential quality in the non-specific arena. And so it goes into like different reactions in the extracellular matrix of, what happens in different areas, whether it's an acupuncture point but so if you think about a CGM, I mean, that's a continuous puncture into the perivascular space. And not only that, it's got some type of electronic signal that is picking it up and transmitting it into that.
Yeah.
So, like, what's the effect of long term wearing something that is a continuous puncture wound?
So it's sensing, I thought it was sensing an electrical signal.
Well, it's a little wire that's puncturing your skin and going down into the perivascular space.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a phenomenon I'm sure they're not thinking about because they're only looking to measure glucose. But then if you think about the puncture thing, if you're doing blood, puncturing your finger every day, that's also having an effect.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And so where does that put us with the, not just the consequences, but the accuracy of the test?
I don't know. I don't know, but it just in the last week, like all these kind of questions have popped up for me in terms of, what are the impacts of all of this? I mean, I don't wear a CGM. I have a Keto Mojo. And when I first started doing the program with Ben and I was doing my blood sugar multiple times a day, probably for 6 months. And then I kind of drifted off. And then when we went back and we did our first 30-day reset this summer, I did it a lot more, but I find myself like not wanting to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think if your diet and your stress levels are in a healthy range, do we need to? And that goes back to like even the Aura Ring. It's very hard to disconnect from data
once you connect to it.
When you're, yeah. I think about this all the time.
Well, I was an early adopter when the Apple Watch first came out because that was like 10 years ago when I started the BioCollective. I had this grand vision of all this stuff coming together, which, people are trying to do now. But I had an Apple Watch and I found that after a period of time, I felt as though I had become a slave to my watch.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I don't know if that's good. So I just took it off and stuck it in a drawer.
Good for you.
Nice. And I haven't really had any devices attached to me.
Yeah.
Since then, I just saw it as an external mechanism. I mean, I know those things can be helpful, but they can also kind of be an addiction in themselves.
Absolutely. I think I can attest to that feeling of, okay, what am I going to miss if I were to put my Aura Ring in a drawer? And I know exactly what that'll be.
So what would you miss?
Right now, these days, I would miss my step count, oddly. And I don't need, there's no need. There's no need. it's a little bit of a goal. It's again, another performance, because I'm always wanting to perform better, do better things with my body. And yesterday I had 22,000 steps, Martha. I'm very,
Oh, wow, that's impressive. I didn't look at my steps from the conference. I did a lot of walking, but I never really looked at, okay, so probably the most steps I had any day. You're sitting in a conference a lot, but I did have a lot of walking despite that. I had 8 to 9,000 steps a day, so that wasn't terrible.
and that's kind of that sweet spot. If I understand, how we should be moving, and that there are diminishing returns when you go above, this idea of 10,000 is a minimum, but really, is that true? I don't know. I do just, I don't know. I want to move better, more efficiently, and get, I want to see improvements. And so I suppose I'm using the Aura Ring as a metric for
A benchmark for that.
Mhm. Mhm.
But I mean, do you have a general sense of how many steps you walk a day, or how much you?
I don't, like, to me, 8,000 feels like 20,000. No, that's not true. 8,000 feels like maybe 13,000. 20,000 step days, I know it because I've taken extra dog walks, or that could be a day where I've actually gone for a walk, jog kind of thing that I do. On those days, I do get more steps. And then in the case of last night, I had 2 long dog walks, plus I went for a run, and then we went to a basketball game and took the stairs. We didn't take any escalators, and we walked a lot last night. So I
Yeah, so for me, I know from carrying my phone with me when I'm take my walk every morning,
uh
I get about 6,000 steps in the morning on
nice.
that walk.
Yeah, nice.
And so the variability comes with if I then come in the house and I'm sitting at my desk pretty much all day long during the week.
Mhm.
Um, I don't, I might not get a whole lot more than that. I'll try to do a short walk after dinner, but then I might get, let's say I get 7,000 steps, or, um, but if the weather's bad and I don't do that and I'm on the computer all day, then I go to yoga. Well, that's not any steps. I'm moving.
Yeah.
I am moving, but I'm not getting steps. And so movement also, that was a big part of, also kind of back to that ALS conference again, was movement. And, oftentimes people with ALS can't move.
Mhm.
So this was pretty interesting because they talked about like vibration plates and being able to, because what movement is also doing is it is moving the lymph in your body, which is detoxifying you. So, even just like standing up and, you know, moving like that, or like jumping
Yeah.
just for a couple of minutes or something, how
Mhm.
that can move the lymph and get things going in your body. So I try to remember to do stuff like that, but they talked about that and they had a number of different ways, like the plates. Do you have a shake plate or one of those little vibrator things?
I do. Mhm.
Do you use it?
Yeah, I just used it shortly before our call. I use it often as a warm up, or part of my warm up, or part of my cool down in a strength training session. It feels very
So
good.
interesting, because you've worked a lot of stuff in your tissues, and so after the strength training, it kind of jiggles that around, or why do
Uh,
you?
I do it, if I do it after strength training, it's so that I can just do some mobility work. I bought it for my knee, and post surgery, it really helped me just kind of have some movement that was non-fatiguing. I couldn't really do strength training
Right.
many months. Oh, well, I mean, that's not true. I did, just not heavy anything. most of the work I did was mobility type of stuff.
Okay, so here was another interesting part of one of the discussions. I think it might have been a Chinese medicine person, I can't remember. But this also reminded me of a Qigong teacher I had in the past who talked about like people who are not mobile or have mobility issues, actually visualizing the movement. And there's some evidence that actually visualizing the movement can have action in your body.
Yeah.
And so you could, like, it sounds sort of nuts, but you could visualize yourself doing squats, or you could visualize yourself lifting weights, or, you know, twisting or moving, and just visualize your body doing that. And, you know, I don't know if that falls in the category of fake it till you make it, but, you know, sort of.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt to try everything. I had heard too about working the non-surgical side, my other leg, and how that can have an effect on, like, somehow there's a transfer
Of information.
to the surgical side. So,
Yeah, the body is so amazing. But that, you know, I'm going back to the puncture thing again, because like the sensitivity of these perivascular tissues. And one of the discussions at the conference was with a woman who has ALS, and she started developing symptoms shortly after she had a head injury. And she's like, I just don't understand how, you know, how that head injury could have, you know, tipped me over into this. And one of the doctors sitting there, he said, well, we are essentially beasts of burden. As we go through life, we're sort of picking up things on our back and going along, and then finally it's something that may seem like a small straw. It's like the straw that breaks the but brings the camel to its knees, and you can't get it up off the ground by just removing that one straw. You've got to kind of take everything off of the pack and start over. But so even something like you've had a lot of different little mini traumas, back to the sort of poke, if you will.
Yeah.
You know, and then you have this one thing that sort of tips the whole system energetically in a downward spiral. Anyway, it was there were a lot. I mean, I learned so much from that conference.
Wow.
That I really wasn't expecting. But they had they have sort of a core foundation of what the kind of central themes are. Like the central categories are metabolic and neurological degeneration and imbalances. And then it goes into deficiencies that are often nutrients, like the nutrients and cofactors. Many of those come from our diet, but many of those are made by microbes in our gut, you know, the B vitamins in particular. And the vitamins, the microbes make the minerals bioavailable. But infections, so these low-grade chronic infections, which of course we talk a lot about SIBO with, Dr. Davis and that's impact on the system. I was surprised there was not discussion there about SIBO, because I'm like, I think that's an additional contributor. Just general imbalances, whether it's toxic burden or immune dysregulation or spinal injury, like, accidents and things like that. But a lot of it had to do with, toxic heavy metals, pesticides, and, these sort of increasing loads of oxidative stress. They talked about dentistry, and the infections in root canals and the mercury and the amalgams. And so there were quite a few dentists who spoke there. And that's one of those underappreciated areas, but it can also be like really expensive to fix it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one of the things they talked about is, just taking great care if you are fixing it, like not doing everything all at once, because that can release too much of a toxic load. And so that was interesting. They did talk about statins, antidepressants, and sleeping pills as being, potential factors. A lot of discussion around non-native EMF and the impact of Wi-Fi and 5G and all these electronic technologies, dirty electricity in your house, and kind of what that has to do. What else do they have?
So these are all things that just in the general health realm we battle, right? These are all
Right,
things that
right.
when it comes to ALS, is there a triage? Like, do we focus on EMFs first? Do we, where do you?
Well, I think that's part of their protocol they're developing as, is foundationally to remove certain things that are you're sensitive to, and kind of starting there, and not trying to overdo. Of course, there's all these people out now selling detox or anti-parasite or this, that, and they did talk about a lot of these factors, but they're like, foundationally you've just got to start by removing the things that you're being exposed to that are creating a bad environment, and then sort of peeling the layers of an onion carefully. And I think in the case of something like ALS, it's very important to be working with somebody who knows what they're doing. But like we see that too with people with the gut who want to kind of dive right in and take care of the gut, and they do too much too fast, and they have a bad reaction because the bad bacteria die off, and that makes them feel like crap, basically. Or somebody goes on the no sugar diet because they have candida, and in 7 days they're losing their mind because there's a pushback reaction to where you think you're going crazy. So, but one of the things that actually wasn't on their poster of all these stuff they're looking at is the emotional and spiritual roots of disease. And there was a lot of discussion around that, but it's not on their chart where they show all this stuff. And in the docuseries that Lisa and I are doing with the Parkinson's group, I think I've told you this, I'd say probably 90 to 95% of the people that we've interviewed so far have had some major life stressor event. It could be losing a job, retiring and losing their purpose, losing a parent, having a very sick child, being in an accident. I mean, it's just like these layers of, and when you start to listen to people's stories and really hear their life story, there's often a lot of emotion that gets trapped in the body.
Right. But the body keeps the score. That's such a classic book. And I feel like that comes up a lot in, this work in nutrition that we do as well.
Yeah. So that I think is a huge piece that really doesn't often get talked about openly, about, really examining, what there might be that is unresolved, that if you deal with it. I know that it's Gabor Mate who's written all those books. And I think he has a new one out actually. that I started listening to. Debbie Osment recommended, and then I got sidetracked on something else. So I'll have to go back and finish that one.
Yeah. I'm just looking up the title because I think I bought it and it sat there because book club.
I
Book
say
club
your books. I know I've got to finish the book club book for next week,
which is a fantastic book. I hope we have a lot of participants.
I do too, because I think like now is most definitely the time for that book and for developing the skills to talk to people with different opinions. Again, I feel like I grew up talking to people with different opinions and respecting different opinions. And we have really drifted away from a society that's open to that.
Yeah. And I love how she breaks down some of the reasons why, which we might not always think about, like even just where we live, where we choose to live, and how we sort of insulate ourselves from other,
Other people. But yeah.
others.
Well, and I mean, social media has only made that worse by, and all the algorithms that, basically put you in a bucket, and you're in the bucket with these people. And so let's don't talk to those people or listen to anything they have to say, or, yeah, it's not good.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that should be a good discussion.
Yes. Yeah. The myth of normal.
Yes, that's the new one my friend Meredith told me to get. I don't have that one. I have the one before that.
Oh, that's the one I have. When the body says no, the cost of hidden stress.